The room was absolute black. No street lamp filtered through the blinds. No indicator light blinked on the wall. The only thing in the world was the rectangle of light held inches from his face. Marcus blinked, his eyes stinging as the screen brightness cut through the stagnant air. He shifted, his back pressing against the cold headboard, and the sheets rustled in the unnatural quiet. He did not move to turn on a lamp. He did not reach for water. His thumb hovered over the glass surface, twitching with a rhythm that had nothing to do with conscious thought. The air in the room felt heavy, compressed by the silence that usually preceded a storm. He watched the status bar at the top of the display. It was a thin, glowing sliver of white against the dark background. He waited for a signal that never came, his breathing shallow and synchronized with the flickering pixels. The phone vibrated against his palm, a sharp, mechanical buzz that broke the stillness. He stared at the icons, his grip tightening as the device pulsed once more. The room felt smaller. The walls seemed to draw in, leaving him tethered to the light in his hand, waiting for the next shift in the digital shadows. The first alert pushed through the lock screen with a sharp, insistent ping. Marcus squinted at the text. Payment failed. He frowned, his thumb hovering over the screen, ready to dismiss it as a system glitch. Before he could tap the notification, the screen flickered again. Another ping cut through the silence. Payment failed. His heart rate shifted, a sudden spike of adrenaline forcing him to sit upright. The phone felt heavier in his palm now, its surface warm against his skin. He swiped to clear the alert, but the phone vibrated violently, a third ping forcing its way into the display. Then a fourth. The notifications stacked up like debris, cluttering the screen and obscuring the background image. He stared at the glowing text, his breath hitching in his chest as he realized these were not system errors. He tapped the icon to open the banking interface, his finger trembling as the loading wheel spun. The device buzzed again, a relentless sequence of warnings that demanded his full attention. He gripped the edges of the phone, his knuckles turning white, waiting for the application to reveal the scope of the damage. The alerts kept coming, one after another, echoing in the dark room. The banking app finally rendered the dashboard. Marcus leaned into the light, his eyes scanning the primary account balance. It was not zero. It was a negative number, printed in a stark, aggressive red that seemed to bleed into the surrounding pixels. He tapped the refresh icon, a small circle spinning uselessly in the center of the screen, hoping for a correction, a glitch, anything other than the truth. The page reloaded, and the red numbers remained, mocking him. He scrolled down. The transaction history was a cascade of crimson entries, a sprawling web of debt that had finally breached the surface of his account. Each line item represented a small, seemingly manageable purchase, now aggregated into a single, overwhelming total. He looked at the bottom of the screen. The overdraft fees were already piling up, adding weight to the crushing numbers. The screen became a map of his own negligence. Every payment he had ignored, every installment he had signed for, was now accounted for in this digital ledger. He pulled the phone closer, his face illuminated by the harsh, vibrant glow of the warning. The reality took hold, steady and cold. He was not just broke, he was underwater. He stared at the screen until his eyes burned, the red text pulsing like a heartbeat in the dark room. Marcus let the phone fall onto the mattress. The screen went dark, but the red numbers remained burned into his vision. He sat up, the springs of the bed frame groaning under his weight, and looked around his room. In the dim light, the space felt different. It was no longer a sanctuary. It was a showroom of fragmented commitments. He stared at the corner where the new desktop monitor sat, a sleek piece of hardware that now looked like a trap. He had opted for the 4-part payment plan, thinking $100 a month was invisible. He reached out and touched the plastic casing, feeling the cold surface. It was not his. Not yet. Beside it, the floor was cluttered with boxes from the shoes he had ordered on a whim, another split payment, another slice of his future income already spent. He stood up and walked to the wall, his gaze landing on the sound system he had rationalized as a bargain. Every single object in the room had been purchased through the same deceptive promise of easy installments. He looked at the pile of debris, the tangible evidence of his poor choices, and realized he had been living in a museum of his own mounting debt. The walls seemed to close in, each item a silent creditor demanding payment he could no longer afford to make. Marcus paced the length of the room, his mind replaying the marketing language that had lured him in. It was always the same pitch, a polished, relentless whisper. 0 interest, 4 payments, no stress. It sounded like a favor. It felt like an invitation to bridge the gap between his bank account and his desires. The promise was built on the idea of convenience, a frictionless path to ownership that removed the sting of the full price tag. He remembered clicking those buttons, the ease of it, the way the system assured him that he was gaining value without sacrificing his immediate liquidity. It was a seductive logic. By breaking the total cost into smaller, bite-sized fragments, the companies made the purchase feel inconsequential. No stress, they said. No interest, they promised. It was a carefully crafted narrative of safety, designed to make the act of spending feel like an act of prudence rather than an indulgence. He stopped by the window, looking out at the silent street, realizing that the entire model was predicated on that singular, deceptive simplicity. It was not a tool for the consumer. It was a psychological lever. The promise of 0 interest was merely the bait, a way to mask the true cost of the commitment, until the final payment was long overdue. Marcus sat back down and opened the shopping app. He navigated to a high-end appliance he had been eyeing for weeks. The price was $400. In the old world, that number was a wall. It was a figure that required a pause, a check of his savings, and a hard decision. But here, the interface did not show him a wall. It showed him a doorway. He watched as the software performed its silent, calculated magic. With a single tap, the $400 dissolved. In its place, the screen displayed 4 payments of $100. The heavy weight of the total cost was gone, replaced by a number that felt disposable, almost trivial. It was a masterpiece of digital deception. The brain, wired to fear large expenditures, saw the 100 and relaxed its defenses. The math was simple, yet the impact was profound. By slicing the total into these small, segmented pieces, the system bypassed his rational spending limits entirely. He stared at the screen, observing how the design prioritized the installment figure, pushing the real cost into a footnote. It was not a sale. It was an amputation of logic. He clicked a tab, and the interface invited him to commit to the first payment. The $400, now completely hidden behind the illusion of a manageable 100. The final screen waited, bright and inviting, asking only for a confirmation. Marcus hovered his thumb over the button. The resistance that usually flared when spending large sums was absent. It had been replaced by a strange, hollow sense of permission. He looked at the total price one last time, but the interface dimmed it, keeping the focus entirely on the first installment. His brain was no longer calculating the drain on his bank account. It was busy calculating the immediate gratification of the arrival of the item. This was the trap. The logic center of his mind was being bypassed, overruled by a design specifically engineered to lower the cost of entry. He felt the tension in his shoulder loosen. The hesitation that should have been a wall became a soft, permeable membrane. He watched his own thumb tremble for a fraction of a second. A final, desperate instinct trying to pull him back. Then, it snapped. The resistance vanished entirely, leaving behind only the urge to complete the cycle. He did not think about the next paycheck. He did not think about the debt. He tapped the button. The screen flashed a bright, approving green, and the transaction was locked in. The impulse successfully converted into a binding commitment. The screen dimmed, then refreshed to show a new status. Order confirmed. But as Marcus watched, the interface shifted. It did not just show a receipt for a single item. It unspooled a calendar. One payment today, another in 2 weeks, a third in a month. He had entered the ecosystem of fragmented commitment. He realized then that he had not just bought a product. He had signed a contract for his own future cash flow. Each installment was a hook, a recurring claim on money he had not yet earned. The interface made the product feel like a singular event, but the back-end architecture treated it as a sustained, multi-month tether. He scrolled through the list of upcoming deductions. They were not isolated events, they were a web. His bank account was no longer a pool of resources, but a target for these automated, recurring withdrawals. The illusion of the small, manageable payment crumbled. In its place stood the reality of a long-term burden, a silent sequence of obligations that would echo through his finances for weeks to come. The item he had purchased was already secondary. The primary acquisition was the debt itself, a persistent, fragmented commitment that had effectively mortgaged his next 3 paychecks without him ever seeing a formal loan agreement. The transaction was not a simple exchange between buyer and seller. Behind the interface, a complex machinery hummed. Unseen by the average user, when Marcus clicked confirm, the lender did not wait for his installments. They paid the merchant the full amount immediately, minus a hefty service commission. This commission was the engine of the entire system. Because the merchant had to surrender a percentage of their revenue to the lender, they did not absorb the cost. They passed it forward. The price of the product on the screen was already inflated to cover the lender's cut. Every consumer, whether they used the installment service or paid in full, was paying a premium for the convenience offered to others. Marcus looked at the price tag again. It was not a reflection of market value or manufacturing cost. It was a distorted figure, bloated by the silent tax of these financial middlemen. The merchant needed to protect their margin, so the sticker price climbed to compensate for the fees. He realized that the convenience of splitting his payment was a debt that everyone else was effectively subsidizing. The system was not just facilitating his purchase, it was restructuring the retail price floor, turning every transaction into a hidden tax on the marketplace. Marcus looked at the screen and realized he was not the customer in this equation. He was the product. Every action he took within the app was being recorded with surgical precision. He clicked a button, and the system logged a millisecond of hesitation before the touch. He scrolled past an item, and the server registered the exact depth of his interest based on the speed of his thumb. There was no such thing as a passive interaction here. Each delay was a data point. Each abandoned cart was a map of his decision-making process. The system was building a high-fidelity model of his impulses, cataloging his preferences, his weaknesses, and his patterns of engagement. He saw the back-end logs flashing in his mind. Timestamps, device identifiers, and navigational paths. It was a constant stream of telemetry feeding a larger, silent archive. He was being converted into a set of variables, a predictable sequence of inputs and outputs designed to be manipulated. The interface was not just a gateway to goods, it was a sensor array. By the time he reached the end of the page, the algorithm knew more about his probable future behavior than he did himself. He was no longer a person making choices. He was a data set in motion, waiting to be processed for maximum efficiency. The algorithm did not wait for Marcus to seek out a product. It knew exactly when his resistance would be lowest. At 11:45 p.m., when his cognitive load was high and his physical energy had waned, the system initiated its move. It tracked his dwell time on previous searches, identifying the precise moment he was most likely to bypass logic for convenience. A notification pinged on his screen, offering a flash sale on items he had only glanced at days before. This was not a coincidence. It was a targeted strike. The interface calculated his vulnerability, serving an ad designed to trigger an immediate, impulsive tap. He felt the urge to click. The system logged the intent before he even moved his finger. He confirmed the purchase, and the instant the transaction cleared, the dataset updated. The new debt record reinforced the profile, making the next prediction even more accurate. It was a self-sustaining cycle. The algorithm converted his moment of weakness into a new financial obligation, which provided fresh data to refine the next ad. The loop tightened. Each purchase was merely fuel for the machine, ensuring the next advertisement would be even harder to ignore. Marcus was caught in a trajectory where every choice was engineered to lead back to the checkout button. Marcus watched the screen, his eyes tracking the flow of information. It looked like a closed circuit. The debt he accrued was not just a number on a balance sheet. It was a signal transmitted back to the source. Every dollar he owed acted as a beacon, telling the system exactly what kind of buyer he was. The loop was complete. His purchases fed the advertising engine, and the engine used that data to generate more personalized, high-pressure offers. He saw the structure clearly now. The data was the harvest, and the debt was the tool used to ensure the field stayed fertile. It was a self-sustaining machine. The more he consumed, the more accurately the system could map his future impulses. It was a digital predator that grew stronger with every transaction he initiated. He reached out to close the app, but a new notification appeared before his finger hit the glass. The system had already anticipated his movement. It was not just tracking his past, it was preempting his reactions. He felt the weight of the design. It was not a series of random advertisements. It was a calibrated architecture built to keep him trapped in a recurring cycle of spending and owing, where the only output was more data for the machine to refine. Marcus stopped looking at the ads and opened his digital calendar. The screen was no longer a list of events. It was a map of impending collisions. He pinned the due dates for his various installment plans. They were not spread out. They were clustered. The 15th of the month became a red line, burdened by 4 separate payments from 4 different merchants. He tapped the 22nd, then the 30th. The dates stacked up like a series of falling dominoes. He dragged his stylus across the screen, trying to find breathing room between the obligations, but the schedule refused to yield. Each entry represented a commitment he had made in the heat of a moment, now demanding fulfillment simultaneously. He watched the notifications begin to populate the coming week. The pressure was not just in the numbers anymore. It was in the encroaching deadlines. He set a reminder for the first payment, then the second, then the third. The alerts chimed, one after another, a rapid-fire sequence of warnings. He stared at the screen as the calendar filled with alerts, the white space vanishing beneath a sea of red blocks. The walls seemed to draw closer. He had locked himself into a schedule that left no margin for error. The silence of the room was broken only by the rhythmic, intrusive ping of the incoming notifications. The first alert changed color from white to a harsh, blinking crimson. It was the 15th. The funds in his account did not move. Marcus watched the status update. Payment failed. Within seconds, a second notification arrived. It was not a reminder, but a notice of a late fee. The lender had immediately applied a penalty, and because his account balance was already razor thin, this new charge pushed his primary checking account into a negative state. He opened the bank app. The screen flashed a warning about an overdraft fee. That single, missed payment had triggered a domino effect. Because the account was now overdrawn, the automated payment for his utility bill failed, incurring its own separate penalty. Then, a credit card subscription service attempted to draw funds, failed, and triggered a third fee. The screen became a rapid-fire scroll of errors. Each failure created a new debt, and every new debt drained the remaining liquidity he had left for the month. He sat still, watching the numbers shift from black to red in real time. The system did not wait for his intervention. It was executing a pre-programmed sequence of penalties, turning one forgotten date into a cascading collapse of his entire financial standing. He had no room to breathe. The notification of the failed payments was only the beginning. Marcus opened his credit monitoring portal, his fingers trembling as he navigated to the score dashboard. The needle on the gauge had plummeted. It was a sharp, vertical drop that erased months of careful growth in seconds. A red warning banner appeared at the top of the interface. Credit risk level increased. He clicked the details. The system had already flagged his profile as a high-risk borrower. He tried to log into his utility provider to explain the situation, but the portal blocked him, citing an automatic security lock triggered by the sudden credit dip. He was trapped outside his own accounts. The financial friction was no longer confined to his bank balance. It had infected his digital identity. He watched as his borrowing power evaporated, replaced by a series of high-interest offers and predatory loan alerts. Every refresh of the page brought new restrictions, new limits, and new barriers. The permanence of the damage hit him harder than the fees. He realized that this was not a temporary glitch he could simply pay away. The system had recorded his failure, and it would use that data to define his access to services for years to come. He was being shut out of the infrastructure he relied on every day. The screen remained locked on the red warning banner. But Marcus stopped staring. The noise in his head, a static buzz of panic and failed transactions, reached a pitch that forced a reaction. He pushed his chair back, the legs scraping hard against the floor, and stood up. The room felt smaller, the air thick with the weight of his own oversight. He walked to the window, watching the street lights flicker, and forced himself to take a slow, measured breath. The paralysis of the last hour was a luxury he could no longer afford. He returned to the desk, not to check the bank app, but to clear the workspace. He shoved aside the scattered mail and the tablet that had been the source of his convenience-based ruin. With a sharp click, he opened a new, empty file on his laptop. A clean white grid appeared on the monitor. No ads, no payment buttons, no algorithmic suggestions, just empty cells waiting for data. He rested his hands on the keyboard, his knuckles pale. The chaos of his finances was about to be forced into a rigid, visible structure. He was finished being a passive user of a predatory system. He was ready to map the damage, one row at a time. Marcus began the audit. He typed the first entry, a high-interest electronics payment. The cell turned gray. Then he added the date. He moved to the next row, searching through his email archives for every confirmation receipt he had ignored. The list grew. A set of headphones, a kitchen appliance, a subscription service he had signed up for and forgotten. Every line item felt like a physical weight being pulled from the dark and forced into the light. He hit a snag when he found an overlapping plan from a retailer he barely remembered. He typed the due date, tomorrow. His pulse quickened. He entered the amount, then the remaining balance. The spreadsheet was no longer just a list. It was a map of his own negligence. Every row was a reminder of a moment where he chose convenience over clarity. He kept typing, ignoring the notifications pinging on his phone. He did not look at the total sum yet. He focused on the details, the merchant, the date, the cost. Row after row, the screen filled with the evidence of his fragmented commitment. He was capturing the monster that had been feeding on his future. He reached the bottom of his inbox, fingers aching, and finally stopped. Marcus hovered his cursor over the final cell at the bottom of the column. His hand trembled, just enough to make the screen flicker. He had spent hours isolating every hidden cost, every fragmented payment, and every looming deadline. The data was complete. He took a breath, held it, and clicked the cell. A formula materialized, pulling the numbers from the rows above. The total appeared. It was not just high. It was a wall. A number so large, it eclipsed his monthly income twice over. He stared at the digits, the red font glowing against the white background. The silence in the room became absolute. He could walk away, close the laptop, and let the penalties swallow his credit. Or he could stay and fight the machine he had helped build. His heart hammered against his ribs. He felt the cold reality of the debt pressing into his chest, demanding an immediate reaction. He looked at the total again, then at the clock. The deadline for the first payment was only hours away. He had to make a choice. Flight into the fog of ignorance, or the fight to dismantle the trap. He tightened his grip on the edge of the desk, knuckles white, and chose the fight. Marcus did not let the number paralyze him. He reached for his phone and opened his wallet app. One by one, he deleted the saved cards, stripping away the shortcuts that had made spending effortless. He opened a fresh document and typed his new mandate. If I cannot afford the full price today, I cannot afford the installment plan. He read the words aloud, the sound cutting through the stale air of the room. This was the end of the fragmentation. He turned back to the spreadsheet, identifying the debts with the highest interest rates. He picked up his phone, his thumb steady. He called the first lender, his voice firm as he requested a modified repayment schedule. He was no longer reacting to the interface. He was dictating the terms. He worked through the list, prioritizing the debts that threatened to spiral. With every call made and every date adjusted, the red numbers on his screen began to shrink. He felt the weight in his chest loosen. He was dismantling the architecture of his own debt, one conversation at a time. The machine was still running, but he was no longer feeding it. The room was quiet. The spreadsheet minimized on his laptop. Marcus sat back, his pulse finally settling into a steady, rhythmic thrum. Then, the phone on the desk vibrated. A bright, insistent banner splashed across the screen. Exclusive offer. Buy this new tech now. Pay in full, 0 interest. It was a trap he knew well. The interface was designed to be frictionless, a path of least resistance leading directly back into the cycle he had just escaped. He felt the old pull, the familiar rush of serotonin, the promise of immediate possession. His thumb twitched toward the screen, hovering over the confirm button. He saw the total price sliced into 4 deceptive, smaller chunks. The math tried to fool his brain again. He stared at the glowing pixels. He saw the design for what it was, a calculated manipulation of his biological urges. Marcus drew a sharp breath, cold and deliberate. He did not tap the screen. Instead, he gripped the edge of his desk, shoved the phone face down, and pushed it across the wood until it hit the wall. He did not look back at it. He stood up, walked to the window, and watched the streetlights flicker. The impulse faded into the dark. Marcus walked back to the wall and picked up the phone. The glass was cool against his palm. He unlocked it, his movements sharp and precise. He dialed the customer service number he had spent the last hour researching. The automated voice greeted him with a cheerful, synthesized tone, directing him through a labyrinth of menus that clearly prioritized silence over conversation. He tapped buttons, his jaw tight, navigating the maze of hold music and pre-recorded prompts. He paced the length of his room, the phone pressed hard against his ear. He felt the tremor in his own hand, a remnant of the anxiety that had defined his weeks of debt, but he did not hang up. He waited through 3 minutes of repetitive, tinny jazz. Finally, the tone shifted. A real voice crackled on the line. Marcus cleared his throat, the sound sharp in the quiet room. He spoke, his voice vibrating with a mix of nerves and newfound resolve. "My name is Marcus. I am calling to discuss the terms of my current installment plan." The silence on the other end was brief. He gripped the phone tighter, ready to defend his position against the script they would inevitably try to read back to him. The agent began with the rehearsed script, citing rigid policy. Marcus did not let him finish. He recited the account number and the exact date of the last payment, his voice steadying with every syllable. He pointed to the data on his spreadsheet, explaining the imbalance in his cash flow with clinical precision. The agent went quiet. Marcus heard the soft clatter of keys on the other end, the sound of a system being forced to accommodate a human reality. "I am not asking for a favor," Marcus said, leaning into the desk. "I am proposing a sustainable timeline for repayment." There was a long, heavy pause. Marcus held his breath, his eyes fixed on the red numbers on his screen. Then, the agent spoke again. The tone had changed. It was no longer a scripted wall, it was a negotiation. He confirmed the adjustment to the interest rate and the extension of the due date. Marcus felt the weight in his chest loosen. He grabbed a pen and crossed out the old, predatory deadline, writing the new terms in bold letters. It was a small victory, but it was absolute. He had forced the machine to blink. He hung up, the silence of the room now feeling like space to breathe rather than a void to fear. The victory was a starting point, not an end. Marcus turned his full attention back to the monitor. He pulled up the master list of every active plan. The screen was still a chaotic sprawl of red, but now he saw it differently. He ignored the total amount and looked at the interest rates. He dragged the entries, shifting rows until the most expensive debts sat at the top of the list. He highlighted them in a sharp, clinical blue. This was the battle plan. He reached for his calculator, tapping in the numbers with rhythmic intensity. He allocated every spare dollar from his paycheck to the highest interest account, ignoring the smaller balances that were easier to clear. He was no longer reacting to notifications. He was dictating the flow of his own money. He set up automated transfers to lock in these payments, ensuring the system could not intercept his intent. His cursor darted across the cells, deleting old estimates and replacing them with rigid, calculated milestones. He felt the shift in his own focus. The spreadsheet was no longer a record of his failures. It was a weapon of precision. He clicked save. The file name changed from debt list to strategy, and he leaned back as the data finally aligned with his will. The first automated transfer executed at midnight. Marcus watched the screen as the balance on the highest interest debt flickered from red to a neutral gray. It was a subtle shift, but it changed the entire geometry of his spreadsheet. He hit refresh. Another payment processed, and the total debt figure ticked downward by a significant margin. He leaned in, his eyes tracing the columns. The red numbers were no longer static walls of warning. They were shrinking targets. He tracked the progress of each payment, watching as the projected interest costs evaporated from the cells. Every time a row cleared, he felt the tension in his shoulders ease. He deleted the completed entries, watching the list shorten and the white space on the screen grow. It was a rhythmic, mechanical process. Click, calculate, clear. The spreadsheet was transforming from a chaotic mess into a clean, ascending ladder of solvency. He tapped his finger on the desk in time with the screen updates. The weight of the debt was physically receding, replaced by the cold, satisfying logic of subtraction. He watched the final balance for the week drop below the threshold he had set. The red was fading. The numbers were shrinking. For the first time in months, the screen did not look like a threat. The final payment processed while the city was still asleep. Marcus refreshed his banking app, his thumb trembling slightly against the glass. The screen pulsed, loading the transaction history. A small, unexpected pending charge appeared at the bottom. A forgotten subscription fee. He felt the familiar spike of panic, but he pushed it down. He opened his account settings, located the recurring charge, and canceled it with a single, decisive tap. He refreshed the app once more. The pending charge vanished. He navigated to the main dashboard. The screen did not show the harsh, warning red of the past months. Instead, the balance was displayed in a clean, steady black. He stared at the figure. It was not a fortune, but it was his. He toggled between his savings and checking accounts, watching the numbers remain stable. He checked the pending section again, empty. The spreadsheet on his monitor reflected the same reality. The rows of debt now replaced by a single, positive sum. He exhaled, the sound loud in the quiet room. He closed the browser tabs, one by one. The machine had been running his life, but he had finally pulled the plug. He set the phone face down on the desk, the screen dark, and leaned back into his chair. Days passed, and the silence of a balanced account became his new normal. Marcus sat at his desk, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the edge of the wood. He opened a browser, intending to research a new tool for his work. A banner ad flickered at the top of the page, vibrant and inviting. It displayed a high-end electronic item he had once coveted, now marked with the familiar, bold text, "Pay in 4." The interface was identical to the ones that had once trapped him in a cycle of fragmentation. The familiar promise of zero interest and easy installments sat directly beneath the product image. His cursor drifted toward the checkout page. The button beckoned, designed to remove the friction of the total price. He watched the screen, his cursor hovering over the call to action. The temptation was a physical pull, a memory of how easy it had felt to just click and possess. He stared at the payment breakdown. The math laid out in simple, deceptive fractions. The machine was still working, still calculating his vulnerability, still waiting for the impulse to override his logic. He did not click. He moved his mouse away from the button and watched the cursor settle on the refresh icon instead. The test had begun. Marcus felt the familiar urge to resolve the tension of the purchase with a single click. The screen glowed, the offer bright and insistent. He pulled his hand back, resting his palm flat against the cool surface of his desk. He did not move. The cursor remained suspended in the air, a digital ghost mocking his restraint. He shifted his weight in the chair, feeling the solid resistance of the backrest. He closed his eyes, cutting off the visual feedback of the advertisement. The room was quiet. He inhaled slowly, counting the seconds until his pulse returned to a steady, rhythmic pace. He focused entirely on the air filling his lungs, pushing out the manufactured urgency of the interface. When he opened his eyes, the screen looked different. It was no longer a doorway to possession, but a collection of pixels designed to distract. He watched the ad refresh, the colors cycling through, but he did not follow the motion. He leaned back, his muscles loosening their grip on the table. The paws stretched, turning into a deliberate act of defiance. He was no longer reacting to the machine. He was observing it. He looked at the checkout timer, the countdown flickering in the corner, and felt a strange, quiet satisfaction in letting it expire. He was in control. Marcus looked past the bold, fragmented payment numbers. He scrolled down until he found the small, gray text showing the final, total price, $400. It was not $100 4 times over. It was $400 today, taken from the savings he had worked months to rebuild. He held the number in his mind, stripping away the artificial ease of the payment plan. The item was a luxury, not a necessity. He looked at the checkout button one last time, seeing it now for what it truly was, a trap designed to bypass his rational budget. He did not need the item. He did not need the debt. He reached out and clicked the small X in the corner of the browser tab. The screen went blank. He pushed his keyboard slightly to the side, creating a physical gap between himself and the digital marketplace. The silence in the room felt different now. It was no longer a void waiting to be filled with consumption, but a space of his own making. He stood up, walked away from the desk, and left the machine to its own flickering. He had made his decision, and for the first time in a long time, the decision was entirely his own. The system was built to operate in the background, a silent architecture of friction-free consumption. It thrived on the illusion that spending could be separated from the weight of payment. Marcus looked at the blank monitor, the dark glass reflecting his own steady gaze. He understood now that the entire interface was engineered to bypass the natural pause of hesitation. It was a machine designed to make the act of giving away money feel like a neutral click, a frictionless glide toward debt. He reached out and pressed the power button on the screen. The light vanished. The hum of the cooling fan died down, leaving the room in genuine, unadorned silence. He had learned the secret. The machine only worked as long as he remained a passive participant. By choosing to calculate the full cost, by choosing to wait, he had broken the feedback loop. The power to turn the machine off did not reside in a software setting or a hidden menu. It resided in his own refusal to participate in the fragmentation of his own resources. He turned his back on the desk, leaving the dark screen behind. The machine was still there, waiting for the next user, but its influence over him had been neutralized. He was no longer a data point in their model. Marcus stood in the center of his room, the darkness no longer a weight, but a clarity. The glowing devices were still present, their standby lights blinking rhythmically like a heartbeat, yet they no longer dictated his rhythm. He walked to the window, watching the street below where every billboard and neon sign whispered the same promise. Buy now, pay later, have it all today. The architecture of the economy was vast, layered into the very fabric of how people interacted with the world. It was a cycle that fed on impulse and thrived on the friction of hidden costs. He thought about the thousands of others currently staring at their own screens, their thumbs hovering over the same tempting buttons. The system was polished, fast, and designed to look like convenience, but beneath the surface, it was a ledger tracking their future. Marcus took a long, slow breath, feeling the weight of his own financial autonomy. The machine was always running, always updating, and always waiting for the next click. But every interface, no matter how clever, relies on a human agent to complete the circuit. He looked back at his desk, then out toward the horizon. Next time that payment button appears, stop. Ask yourself, who is actually making this decision? Is it you, or is it the design?